I'm going to open up for the commission for questions, but let me take the chair's prerogative and begin with a question that I was really struck by the point of, I think, very constructive disagreement between Mildred and Steve, which is, Mildred, you said, I suspect it's not, you actually don't disagree on this, but I have a question attached to it. You said that the definition of a professional is that a professional understands that he or she has a calling, that has a goal that that professional expertise is seeking. And I think it's important for us to understand that there's an important social institutional construct based on that conception, which is professionals have significant autonomy in our society. Peer review is based on that notion of professionals understanding that they have a calling and they will rise to that calling and expect their colleagues to. But most professionals have never been required to systematically examine their calling, and I think that's what Steve Hyman was referring to. Our education has become sufficiently specialized at the professional level, even though, to the credit of this country, the broad liberal arts and sciences model of undergraduate education is still the dominant, model that we admire and try, those of us who are leaders, try to continue to progress on. So my question is, given that it's a fact that most professional scientists have never been required and are not required, generally speaking, to systematically examine their calling and the goal of what they're doing, how important is it in neuroscience, given all of the issues that it raises about human being, and raises for the sake of good science, how important is it for us as a commission to think about recommendations for how that examination of the calling of neuroscience might go forward? Mildred, do you want to? I would actually like Pat and Steve also to weigh in, and Paul. Yes, but
shall I respond
yes,
first?
Please.
Yeah, the reason I use the grand term transformational learning, which I agree is very aspirational, is that I'm trying to argue that we should, I'm making an assertion, an aspirational assertion, that we should be thinking about this for scientists. The traditional professions, like physicians and nurses, do have created subgroups who are physician ethicists, who are nurse ethicists, and in a sense I'm calling for an opportunity to be a scientist ethicist. And another aspect of what it means to be professional is not only the autonomy that we grant, but that there's an inherent fiduciary responsibility, and that part of what it means to be properly educated in a profession is to think about whose one's constituencies are, to whom one owes obligations. I don't think we've really engaged with that for scientists, and I think that Paul Volpe's comments speak directly to that. The large set of very reflective and important questions that he had at the end of his presentation, I think are critical. So I would argue that the commission think about the ways in which science preparation really can engage scientists in thinking about the larger social purposes of their work.
Pat?
Yeah, I agree with the last. I mean, there's no expectation in the current training of scientists that there's an obligation from a professional perspective of understanding for them to reflect on the meaning of what they're doing, and then the responsibility of knowledge transfer. Mm-hmm. The knowledge transfer training is to each other. That's where so what do? We have communication courses that basically develop skill sets in talking to other scientists, other professionals. We have literally no skill training in knowledge transfer to the public or to policymakers or anybody else who are in decision-making capacities and are trying to use research to develop best practices. And I think it's traditionally thought that that our obligation is to do the very best science that we can do, put it out there, and however it might be used by the public, it will be used by the public. On the other hand, we have to be a little bit self-reflective in recognizing now that we are participating in a process in which we actually enjoy being in the public eye, right? That if you look at the public coverage of science now compared to the way it was a generation ago, where it was almost absent from public newspapers and other things, it's changed completely. And we've promoted that.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to do that, then we have to recognize that there comes with that an ethical responsibility to understand how to participate in that process. So as I said, it's not about simpler words or shorter sentences and say, well, I said it simply. If they misinterpreted it, it's their problem. I think that's part of the self-reflection process of what our professional responsibilities are. It's also part of the educational process of providing us, our field, with the tools to be able to do that. It's not natural to do it. We're trained to be expert, and we're trained to be narrow, and we're trained to be sophisticated in how we communicate, and that has to be adjusted.
Yeah. It's interesting that you use the word trained rather than educated. Science is a public trust. And even though it's not directly accountable publicly, it is a public trust. And the funding that goes to it is predicated on that idea.
Well, I use the word trained because, I've watched eminent scientists go through. I've watched Jim Heckman, who's very much into this area of early investment and in issues around children, who's trained to speak about this to the public in a way that would resonate with the work that he's trying to do. For me, I'm training somebody in my laboratory to do a certain kind of molecular biology experiment. That's training.
Yes.
There's an education component to it, but it's training. And I think we have to be trained on how to communicate in ways that, in the context of understanding cultural frames, understanding the use of language, things that we just don't get exposed to at all as neuroscientists.
I would like to think of, just focus on something a little bit different from that, not at all a disagreement, but something different, which is the dialectic between intellectual freedom and appropriate attention to areas of ethical and policy concern. Maybe one, as a shorthand, we can imagine that scientists do feel they have a responsibility, and they might imagine it as a romanticized version of Galileo, right? Who, was actually a much cagier, socially aware person than this view. But pursuing discovery wherever it goes, despite censoring social forces, and now we look back and say, well, how terrible that the church was censoring science. But to contemporaries, he was potentially upsetting human self-understanding and the social order. And we see it as appropriate, indeed heroic, that he did so. And I think it would be a terrible mistake to tell basic scientists that and I don't think anyone's implied this, but said this directly, but I think there's an implication, should be in some way fettered, because we can worry about all kinds of negative uses, but we just never know where science is going ultimately, and we may fail then to discover something that would be critically helpful to a person with autism or schizophrenia or Alzheimer's disease or any of the other panoply of horrors that we don't yet know how to address well. I think what I'm looking for, at least when I teach, and we'll see where the commission comes out on this, is not a kind of ethical education which dampens scientific curiosity and frankly bold exploration, but rather makes the scientist reflective, so that when they've discovered something, or perhaps more often when they're engaged in something applied, some sort of technology, they understand that it does have implications, and they understand that perhaps they should pause, perhaps they should raise these concerns with appropriate professional bodies or others. Maybe one thing we don't have is a place for people to express their concerns. Their NIH project officer or NSF project officer might not quite get it. But I think the healthy, ultimately, if the goal is the healthiest outcome for society, understanding that there are always going to be risks of misusing any technology, we want to, on the one hand, make sure that scientists feel able to explore without unnecessary intellectual fetters, but by the same token, become deeply aware about the implications of their research and initiate the right kinds of conversations, especially when it comes to applied technologies.
It's
I'm
interesting.
sorry to be going on at length about this, but I always fear that while I very much want to argue for ethics, I don't want to argue for narrowing the scope of scientific investigation.
Yeah.
I think the other thing which is
Steve,
really
can you
important.
stop, please? Okay, because we can't make eye contact here.
Yeah, no problem. Right. So then the only other thing very quickly is I think we do a miserable job in education. We don't actually exploit the wonderful four-year often liberal arts, not always liberal arts, education that produce our scientists, but also physicians and nurses. And learning ethics late as a required course, I think, is not effective. I implied this in my opening remarks. I think something like ethical reflection requires a building process, and it really should start in undergraduate life. And in fact, if you think about the required pre-medical curriculum for
Okay, Steve, I've got to tell you, please stop. I have to ask Paul to speak. We're just on a time schedule.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right. Sorry.
Thank you.
I'll just say once then.
No,
we
you won't.
really
Just stop,
entirely
please.
Pre-medical requirements.
Okay, thank you. One thing that Steve said that I think is real, I mean, everything was excellent, but one thing that I really want to underline is we really, and we've said this before as the commission, and I think we really have to drive it home. You can't begin ethics education at the professional level. It has to begin at the undergraduate level. And nothing that we will say as a commission says, let alone implies, a narrowing of scientific freedom and creativity. And it is interesting that raising the issue of science as a public trust raises that scare in scientists' minds rather than understands this as what Steve and Mildred said earlier, that science is it's a professional and a public calling. Right. And in order to understand it as a calling, and I feel that it's really important for us as a commission to make it clear, there has to be a knowledge base to it, the same way that there has to be a knowledge base in the expertise of working in a lab. There has to be a knowledge base in the expertise of what are the ethical parameters of good science. And that's what we would like as a commission to drive forward with the principle that we have underlined and added in our, to the Belmont principles of intellectual freedom. A very important, extremely important principle of a free society, and it raised some hackles when Vice President Biden went to China and spoke about how important intellectual freedom is in the engine of creativity on the economic engine and the engine of creativity of our country. So this is very helpful. Paul,
Just a very brief
briefly,
comment.
thank you.
There,
I have a list of commissioners.
there are three areas of responsibility that scientists need to assume. The first is ethical responsibility. The first is ethical responsibility for the integrity of their own research, their relations to their colleagues, their local responsibility, their home institutions. The second level is their responsibility to their disciplines and for the oversight, promotion, and collective activity of their fields of expertise. They have a responsibility to shepherd that. And the third is to recognize their social responsibility to science as a public enterprise. So I think we need to impress upon scientists the need to think about all three of those. We've been really good at the first, less good at the second, and poor at the third.
Thank you. Jim?
Very quickly, I hope. Paul and Steve, I heard your comments sort of on two ends of a scale, and I want to suggest a clarification and ask your response. Paul, you talk about the concern that we had better be thinking, begin thinking about, I think was your phrase, possible abuses. And then, Steve, you used the word fettered multiple times, that, gee, if we would get our implying that if we get our thinking ahead of the application of the need, that we could find ourselves constrained. And I'm so glad that Amy brought up this notion of intellectual freedom. But do we need to be concerned about, I don't believe that we need to be concerned about thinking about the future. Aren't some of the fundamental principles that already exist, principles that we should espouse and remind one another of, and suggest, principles of respect for persons, the need for the appropriateness of privacy and of informed consent? Rather than imagine that we're helpless about the future or we fear being fettered about future science, don't we actually set ourselves free from the fetters and actually address the future by being explicit about some of these very, very important ethical principles? I open it to all of you, but Paul?
I'll just say briefly, the devil is in the details in ethics. It's not so much the question of informed consent or personal liberty, it's how you apply it to any particular technology in any particular place. The issue for scientists, for me, is not so much fettering them in any way, but just having them be more creative and imaginative about their own work, and to try to project into the future the exact way that the Socially Responsible Innovation Project is trying to do in Europe, to get scientists thinking about how might this be applied, how might be applied wrongly, not to stop doing it or to fetter them, but to think about advocating for correct use, to think about potential countermeasures, to think about other things that could mitigate any misuse. And I think that's where the real
I like
issue
your
is.
aspiration word also. I don't know.
I agree entirely with Paul, and I'm glad you raised this question.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to ask other commissioners to get their questions out, and maybe we'll take a few questions and then ask you to choose how you want to answer them, because I have Dan, John, and Barbara on the list, and Christine. So I'll take two at a time. Dan and John first, and then Barbara and Christine.
Well, thanks for all of your comments. They're very helpful. All of us agree, obviously, that education is good, but doing it effectively is the hard work. I want to just go through a list of some of the barriers I've kind of heard and sort of talk about those. The first we've heard a little about is this question of whether it is the job of scientists to reflect on the ends of their work or not, whether it is a profession, et cetera. Second, we've heard the scientists are in the best position to restrain hyperbole, but we also know there are lots of incentives for scientists to engage in hyperbole, for grant money and publicity, et cetera. Scientists and ethicists need to work together, but then we also hear that scientists are perceived as the naysayers, the people who will, the ethicists are the naysayers, right, who will restrain the freedom of scientists. Science is multinational, so we need a multinational ethic, but then we go across the questions of cultural relativism and moral standing to criticize one culture versus another. We need to educate not just for knowledge, but also for virtue. How do we do that? We've heard about a hidden curriculum in science as well as there is for clinicians, and the structure of learning, so that what we typically do is have an online course for scientists, which actually makes them hate ethics. So with all of that, I mean, it's all great, but I want to know how we get concrete answers so that we're not just going to put something on paper and not have any effectiveness.
John, well, concrete answers, which would be
Yeah.
great. That's what we're going to be working on, so keep that in mind. John?
Okay, thanks. So, and thank all of you for a really stimulating panel. I want to ask a very pragmatic, practical question about pedagogy that follows up on Dan's many questions. And this is drawn from my own experience teaching bioethics in a major medical school in New York City, which eventually drove me back into teaching undergraduates. So on the one hand, we had large classes that encompassed, say, the entire first-year class of medical students. The good thing about this was that it reached everybody, right? The bad thing about it was that everybody hated it, right? Both the students and the faculty. It just was not an appropriate window of opportunity for real learning. It was viewed as a hindrance and a distraction from the real stuff they were supposed to be learning. On the other hand, some of the best educational experiences I've ever participated in were these very small groups of interns, residents, nurses, social workers in neonatology, geriatrics, meeting biweekly or monthly, talking about cases, where students left those sessions realizing that asking ethical questions is just a part of what we do. It's a part of who we are. It's a part of the expert handling of a case. The trouble with this method is that with the retail method, is that it's very hit and miss. Not everybody got the opportunity to be there. So I'm asking you to think outside the box here. For me, the answer was just to go back to teaching undergraduates, okay? They actually read and write papers for you. Are there any emerging methods or best practices or, people who are thinking outside the box here in trying to really engage with people in a meaningful way that reaches everybody, at the same time?
Mildred?
So to Dan, no one ever said it would be easy.
Yeah.
And there's even more problems. I had the privilege of leading a program from the NIH, Amy mentioned it in the introduction, in which we had the hard challenge of developing strategies for teaching bioethics to 10th grade biology students through 10th grade biology teachers who had no training in bioethics. And we spent a lot of time thinking about, is this worth doing? Can we do it in a high quality way? At the end of that process, we don't have time to go into all the strategies we used, but we now have a resource that within the first half year of its release, 12,000 teachers across the country asked for, and I have no idea how many are now using it. One of the findings from that pilot study was not fettering science, not creating fetters. Many of the teachers in the pilot tests we did in 50 sites across the country said that this awakened students to science who had felt uninterested in it. And the pedagogical reason I think that happened is it wasn't training, it wasn't education, it was what Steve said, it was creating curiosity, putting in front of them real questions that they actually realized, I don't know what the right thing is to do. And that created an impulse to figure out, what do I think about this? At the Hastings Center, we're taking the next step, which is that we've designed a program for secondary school students. The first one that we did that was done with the NIH was really focusing on curriculum development for teachers to use in their classrooms. What we're doing at the Hastings Center right now that is really moving is a research. We're engaging high school students in doing their own research in bioethics. with mentoring, with scaffolding, they are helped to identify a real question right now that our country doesn't have a good way of handling. And they're responsible for developing their own arguments and presenting them in community settings to their parents, to community members. We have an example of this in Summit, New Jersey, where 500 people in the community came together to hear 10 high school students talk about a range of bioethics issues. So I'm not advocating courses necessarily. I think it has to be anything that's big and difficult is going to require work in many different ways through a multifactorial strategy.
I agree entirely with that. I think the more we worry about everybody having, and I know this wasn't really the question, but a uniform exposure, which leads to bureaucratization, and I think we are at the risk of truly deeply educating no one. Henry Ford wouldn't have been very good at designing effective pedagogy, and I think some of the growing pains with massively online courses also reflects the problem of commoditization. I think that what we just heard about beginning at many levels, and I would add having many different paths, gives us a much great, we have to study these things, figure out what works, how we match people, but the key is real engagement. And I don't think engagement is likely in these large uniform settings. And indeed, when I talk about fettering science, it really, the concerns in the community, and they're real and they're frequent, come again, not from the Belmont principles, but through their bureaucratization, through certain ways in which I think we all know, IRBs and IACUCs can be terrific and constructive and helpful, which doesn't mean letting people get away with things, or they can become bureaucratized. And I think the same is true in education.
So let me just say something that I've written on and given talks on that is out of the box, but in a way that will be familiar. Professional ethics, which has now been integrated in almost all of professional schools, certainly in medical schools, was created to be taught at the graduate level in medical schools, for example, medical ethics. I, for the life of me, cannot find a reason why only doctors should be taught about medical ethics, for example. And at Penn now, Zeke Emanuel is teaching medical ethics to undergraduates as well as to graduate students. And it could be the same course. It's a very challenging course, and others are doing it as well. To integrate scientific ethics and professional ethics at the undergraduate level. So, John, I don't think you made a mistake. And it's not to take it away from teaching it at the professional level, but it's going to be more effective, more stimulating if it's taught as to undergraduates who are less jaded than, professionals are when they get into professional school. So I think, just to be specific about, neuroethics, and the ethics of neuroscience, given the intellectually challenging issues it raises, it is prime candidate for finding ways of introducing our undergraduates to these issues and having them reflect on them before they get into the more specialized, more pressure cooker atmosphere of professional training. Pat?
I would say one other I think people have touched upon this in a wonderful way, and the word integration has been used a lot. And I think that's really the path forward. So I work with some people in the Rossier School, which is the School of Education at USC, who've developed a neuroscience curriculum, K through 12. And part of the curriculum, not separate, not an appendix, are issues that revolve around ethics and neuroscience, and sometimes the students don't even know that that's what they're dealing with. In graduate school now, what we're doing, so every graduate student engages in some journal club of some sort in their discipline. And I've had meetings with faculty about doing this, where there is a component of the discussion, not just about the quality of the science or the the scientific implications, because that's where you spend most of your time. You have an original research article, you sit around and discuss it. There are ethical considerations to discuss. The meaning of this, how would this be translated? How could you translate this in a way that would be meaningful? So if it's an appendix, if it continues to be an appendix, oh, I have to take this 2-credit course in ethics. I have to take this 2-credit course. It's seen as a separate universe,
Yeah, and
as
there-
opposed to an integrated universe with
Yeah.
neuroscience.
Yeah.
That's, to me,
It's also the difference between distribution requirements and a required course. That is, you shouldn't be able to get through as a professional without having been exposed to ethics, but that doesn't mean there ought to be a required course.
But, in some ways, there's a bit of cross purposes. We're all talking about the same thing in terms of integration, but when you have a training program funded by the NIH, for
Yeah.
example, they want to see, one of the bullets, right, as a separate, segregated component of training, as opposed to an integrated component of training. I've talked to a program officer about, how would you feel if we had this integrated throughout our core curriculum? And they get nervous because, well, how do we know it's going to be right? So they're emphasizing, in fact, the segregation when, in fact, it should be.
Yeah.
It should.
So that's an important point. Let me just make another point on this, and then Paul, you're going to hold, no, you're going to hold, because you'll have a chance, we'll have, but if there isn't funding for ethics in neuroscience, it's not going to be done well, let alone, it may be done, but it won't be done well. Christine and Barbara. Barbara first, then Christine.
I wanted to go back to the public discourse piece, and particularly as it relates to getting to the policy level. Both Pat and you, Paul, talked about the role of neuroscientists in leading a public discussion, and with a little bit of how far a neuroscientist could go from the Pat side. I'm interested if we were going to propose a structure or a program or a forum or some way to get that public discourse to lead to policy, if you have any ideas about who should be at the table, who should be doing it, what kind of program or whatever could be done that would help actually get the discourse to happen and to get it to move to policy.
So thank you all for wonderful presentations, but my question, I think, kind of builds on Dan's and John's a little bit. I was thinking about, I think that the integration of science and ethics makes sense. What I want to hear a little bit more about, is there any reason to privilege neuroscience over other sciences? And then a very specific question actually for Millie, because you had this really nice list of suggestions, one of which was a learning community. And I just want to hear, is that anything different than what has already been being discussed? Or did you have something specific in mind about that?
Let's begin with Paul and then Mildred.
A couple comments. First of all, I taught a course in medical ethics at the University of Pennsylvania in 1992, so Zeke is following a long and storied history.
No egos in this field, as you can
No,
see.
the Center for Ethics at Penn was very active in undergraduate education and continues to be. But the problem is that was a course, and Zeke's course is a course. And while courses are great, it touches a very, very small number of undergraduates. One of the things we're doing at Emory is we've applied for a grant to try to create a innovative way to integrate ethics education throughout the undergraduate curriculum so that it touches every student in almost every course, and especially in their extra and co-curricular life, in their dormitory life. Because you can't have ethics overlaid. We learned that in medical school in 2000, around 2000, give or take a few years on either side. Medical schools all around the country redesigned their curriculum. The one at Penn that I was involved in was called Curriculum 2000. And part of that redesign broadly in the top medical schools was to try to figure out how to put humanism, professionalism, and ethics into the medical curriculum in a way that was integrated rather than overlaid. The problem that you were talking about, John, is you can't come in and give an ethics course and go away and then have it not modeled in the clinics and not modeled in, right? So the real challenge is not how to create better courses or even how to create, experiential moments taken away from the lived experience of being a physician or a scientist or an undergraduate, but it is how to integrate ethical conversation into the very fabric of the way in which a university operates. And that's the real challenge that we have, and that's what ethicists should be trying to figure out how to do. And that absolutely means having buy-in and by faculty and getting everybody from, psychology and sociology and geology and basket weaving to say, at some point or another, I need to ask the question, is there an ethical component to what I'm talking about, and raise that as a learning moment for everyone so that it becomes part of the fabric of what we do. And then one last comment about public discourse. Scientists in whatever field need to be part of public discourse. They don't necessarily need to lead the public discourse. My concern has been that their voices have been too absent from the public discourse, because there has been an ethic in science that those scientists who are represent the sciences in public discourse are considered to be, there's been a certain amount of approbation about that. I mean, that the real public scientists aren't real scientists. And I think what we need to train scientists is that it's an absolute responsibility of being a scientist to be part of the public discourse and to be engaged in the public discourse and to write op-eds, not only as explainers of their science, but as advocates of their science. They're citizens with every right to be advocates, as everyone else has.
Can I just answer that? I find the term, that neuroethics should be privileged. Privileged is really a pejorative term. They're just different. What goes under neuroethics, maybe it's really a bad moniker for a very different field. I mean, because what's really different and interesting are issues of memory, identity, moral agency, and even the origins of morality, the degree to which they're evolutionarily or neurally dictated. So it's a very different field. And what I would say is, if there's a particular, of course it's coming up now because of the BRAIN project, which will actually touch on all of these things that make us peculiarly human. I think what's useful about them is that that much of traditional bioethics is, even though people disagree, many of the rubrics are intellectually far more settled, and those having to do with narrative identity and so forth are still very much in flux, partly because we keep learning new things empirically. And so I think it gives us a real opportunity to engage at least a subset of students in a very active and challenging and living area of that is pushing the boundaries of ethics. So I just think it's a different set of problems.
Thanks, Steve. Pat?
So I'm going to, in terms of answering Barbara's question, so I think we'll disagree a little bit. I think that that public and policymakers respond well. At least this is based on my own experience. So it's and experience of other people who are on the council who've gone around to lots of different states. I've been in a lot of states talking to a lot of policymakers over the last 10 years. One of the issues that the public gets nervous about, in fact, and policymakers, is advocacy. If you're advocating for what you're doing, there is the sense that it's not, that there's some skewing or some component of what you're presenting that has a specific goal of extracting something from the public or from policymakers for advancing whatever it is that you want to do. As opposed to, and maybe it seems silly to contrast this, but being the knowledge transfer agent. So I'm on a board in Canada for a Canadian-wide network, research network on brain and child development. There is a core that speaks to this issue of knowledge transfer to the public and policymakers. There's also an ethics core as well. It's integrated in every project. And it's not about advocating for a particular position or it's about transferring knowledge in a way that resonates. But believe it or not, people who are not trained in science can understand science. There is this sense that scientists have, including me. I've had this for until I started to immerse myself. And, I've never been more nervous than going in front of a group of state senators in Kansas or Oklahoma to talk about this. But the reality is that people can understand science if scientists learn how to talk about it, not advocate for, but to say, this is important for you to know. That's the advocacy part. And then here is what we know, and here is what we don't know. Advocacy is a bit of an issue, I think, in engaging the public.
So thank you all. Our time is more than up, alas. We're going to take a 10-minute break, but not before we thank, you've really been tremendous communicators and very thoughtful. Mildred, Steve, Pat, and Paul, thank you so very, very much.